Hello and welcome to another movie review here on HSG, and this is a movie which I was surprised actually when I checked Google for the reviews and for the scores on stuff like Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, and not just audience scores, critics as well, even local newspapers and stuff like that. They don't like this film, and that surprised me because, spoiler alert, I do. Now, speaking of spoilers, we will get into spoiler talk later on, and for this movie it's very important to do so. So if you haven't seen the flick, stick to this first part of the video, and then maybe come back after watching the movie and see if you agree or disagree with what I have to say. And of course, put your thoughts down there as well. Now, the movie has, I believe, a Spanish production company behind it. The cast is great. You've got Charlie Heaton, George McKay, Anya Taylor-Joy. It's a stacked cast. They're well known from TV and movies, they're good actors, and they give good performances in the movie. The essential plot, without spoiling anything, is fairly simple, and it's certainly not as generic as the trailers make it look, and I'm going to come back to the trailer point because I think it's one of the issues that this movie has, and that is that it's a British family who have run away from England to America back to the childhood home of the mother to escape an abusive father. Immediately, that's different to a generic haunted house style movie, because usually, even for instance in something as iconic as a Pet Sematary, for instance, which isn't exactly this genre, but still moving into a new home is treated usually as just something that the characters have done. There's no real reason given for it, they've just moved house. Sometimes a throwaway line about having a new job is in there, but this, to me, was far more compelling, straight off the bat, and it was only a small thing, but it immediately made it more interesting to me. Now, as far as the producers of this film, they also happen to have produced The Orphanage, which I really liked. In fact, it has one of my favourite horror endings, and it's a somewhat undiscovered gem for many people, and it's a slow burn, for sure. This one is as well, and I think that might be one of the issues that people have. This movie is very slow. You could call it taking its time, but I think the majority of people would call it slow. Now, for me, I didn't have an issue with that, because the fact that the characters were compelling and that the period piece gives it more character than a modern movie ever would have had in the same storyline meant that I was along for the ride. Sometimes I do like to fast forward certain scenes and pointless shots and dialogue in movies that you can tell from a mile away are not really essential. They're just to pad the runtime. In this movie, I didn't do that. I watched the movie and I enjoyed it. Now, it's almost 2 hours long, so some people won't have that same kind of patience, but to me, I appreciated the movie for what it was going for, and one of the primary issues that people have is that it's not quote-unquote scary enough. I get that, but to me, I would put this movie in a similar category to something like Signs, for instance, from Shyamalan. Signs happens to be in my top 10 favourite movies of all time. I think it's brilliantly made and I love it. I can watch it any time and thoroughly enjoy it. But the pacing is fairly slow and there aren't many scenes which you would call scary. Yet I still love it. And I like this one too. Now, there are two movies in particular which this film actually does remind me of, especially if you put them together. And of course, I'm not going to say what they are because that would spoil it, but I am going to bring back that point in the spoiler section. Now, as far as stuff which I think you can appreciate regardless of if you love or dislike the film, are that the casting is good, the acting is good, the scenery, the cinematography is all great, and the character almost of the house itself suits the story also. I think the issue arrives with people's own expectations, because one of the key things about this movie is that it plays with those expectations. It's not a run-of-the-mill flick, and in that regard, it actually shares a lot in common with a movie that I recently reviewed on the channel called Extinction, from, I believe it was 2018, with Michael Pena. It's available on Netflix. Seems to be a run-of-the-mill sci-fi kind of B-movie level alien invasion flick. It isn't, and that's kind of the point. Likewise with this one, there is more on offer than what the trailers show. Now, the trailers for this flick don't do it any favours, because like many films, they misrepresent the movie. That's a shame, because it's part of the reason why I think some people won't like it. I could totally understand that. In fact, I would say if you haven't seen a trailer for this movie, don't watch any, because they don't do anything for you. In fact, if anything, they make you think the movie's a lot more generic than it actually is. Now, the first piece of advice I would give to someone who is going to watch it is prepare to sit down and be relatively quiet and just watch a good flick. This is not a movie to watch with friends and talk over. It's a waste of time if you're going to do that. It's also not a movie that you should be on the edge of your seat for. Again, not the point. And I think that to some degree the period piece aspect of it kind of lends itself toward that, because a lot of those movies tend to be dialogue based. They take their time, typically more of a, romantic or drama kind of genre. This one happens to take that sort of scenario and inject it with a bit of horror and thriller. And I think that suits it. I like it. It's not generic, it's anything but. And yet some people still seem to find it so, which is odd to me, because this movie is anything but generic. There are certain things that you can predict, and certain cliched characters. There's a character of a lawyer, for instance, who is fairly generic, but he certainly doesn't ruin the film. Now, overall, I would say watch it, for sure. It will not appeal to everyone, but give it a chance. That's what I would say, in a very similar way, again, to Extinction. Give the movie a chance. If you don't like it, then what have you lost beyond a couple of hours? It's not really a lot to lose for the sake of finding something that you may actually love. Now, as far as spoiler talk goes, the two movies in particular which this flick reminded me of put together are actually The Others and Split. Because, of course, multiple personality disorder, and obviously in The Others you got the period piece, high caliber of actor in there, and also this kind of who's really being haunted kind of angle, which The Others plays with. And I thought that that was the route that this movie was going to take. And of course it didn't end up that way. I actually preferred where it ended up, but I did think that I could see why some people might find it a little bit like, oh, that's what it actually is. For me, that didn't ruin it though. I actually like movies that present something supernatural and then give a more realistic or science-based reason for it. I actually like that. I think it's subversive, and I enjoy it. One of the other things that I don't really get about some of the criticisms of this film is also that it has glaring plot holes. I heard more than a couple of critics say that, and yet I'm not exactly sure what they're talking about. Unless they just didn't understand the movie, I didn't really notice any glaring plot holes. Now granted, I only watched the movie once, so of course if I watched it again I may notice some, but all of the primary story points that needed to be shown tied up. And most of the things which could be, location or, let's say, physical plot points, like the mirror moving maybe or something like that, well, you can quite easily put that down to it being in his mind. That's sort of the point of the story. So I'm not exactly sure what plot holes these people are referring to, but I guess it's possible. I just didn't find that to be the case for me personally. So overall, I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's definitely a movie which is kind of split down the middle. And even as far as online scores go, they're very middling, like 47, 53, those kind of percentages, which surprises me, actually. I thought that the film, even on the caliber of the acting and the casting and the cinematography alone, is worth more than that. The fact that the story has a couple of twists along the way, I really don't get why people are so harsh on this film. Is it an Oscar-level performance or an Oscar-level production in any sense? No, and who says it's trying to be? I was pleasantly surprised by the movie, and I enjoyed it. I don't really get what people's problem is, but tell me down below. If you found a glaring plot hole that ruined it for you, then tell me what it was. Maybe I've even forgotten about it and will agree with you. Who knows? But tell me your thoughts down below, and of course, stick around on the channel for more movie reviews in future. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.